and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unraveling a mystery that hides right in plain sight. It shapes our laws, our taxes, and our daily lives, yet it operates almost entirely in the shadows. To set the stage, I want to take you back to a thrilling, true crime moment. Miami, 1973. An executive from a bank in the Bahamas flies into town to go on a date. He leaves his briefcase at the woman's apartment before they head out to dinner. What he doesn't know is that he has just walked directly into a trap.
Here's exactly how the setup went down. The woman he's dating, she's actually a private investigator, and the friend who set them up, an informant for the intelligence unit of the IRS. While the executive is out eating dinner, the informant sneaks into the apartment, opens the briefcase, and photographs the whole shebang inside. What the IRS agents find in those files is absolutely groundbreaking. It's a list of the bank's clients using offshore accounts to evade taxes. Now, they were fully expecting to find organized crime figures, but the vast majority of the names were actually some of the richest people in America. The IRS realized they hadn't even touched the 0.1% hiding massive wealth. But here's the shocking twist. When a new director takes over the IRS shortly after, he steps in and personally shuts the entire investigation down. He renames the unit, refocuses it on quote-unquote typical crime, and the government intentionally turns a blind eye to these ultra-rich tax evaders.
Okay, let's dive into this. Why does the system actively protect the ultra-rich? And why, whether we vote for liberals or conservatives, does it feel so incredibly hard to actually change? This is the core question that's going to guide our entire explainer today.
To really understand the gravity of this, look at this number, $100 billion. Let that sink in. That is roughly the massive amount of money the United States loses every single year to tax evasion by the ultra-rich. It's a staggering figure. And here's why this matters directly to you. Because of the revenue the government misses out on, honest, average citizens like us end up having to make up the difference, paying roughly 15% more in taxes. It's a burden placed directly on the shoulders of everyday people.
So, Section 1, redefining the modern oligarchy, wealth as power.
To figure out how this happens, we kind of have to shift our whole understanding of how power actually operates in the modern world. We're moving into phase 2 of our mystery. When you hear the word oligarchy, you probably picture a small, shadowy group of billionaires officially running a government from a smoke-filled room, right? Well, scholars like Jeffrey Winters, who literally wrote the book on this topic, provide a very different modern academic definition. Oligarchy is the power of concentrated wealth itself to evade the state. Wealth doesn't just buy power. Actually, wealth is power. If you have enough of it, you have the inherent capacity to bypass government reach, regardless of whether you ever officially hold a political office.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how they execute that power. They don't do it with private armies or anything out of an action movie. They do it with the wealth defense industry. It's a massive, mundane network of everyday professionals, lawyers, accountants, lobbyists, and tax experts. These are just people going to their office jobs, but their specific goal is to build completely untraceable mazes of shell companies. They muddy the link between an asset and its billionaire owner so perfectly that the government literally cannot navigate it to collect taxes. It's like a giant, unsolvable puzzle.
Moving on to Section 2, the illusion of influence and what the data reveals.
So, if we know this is happening, you might legitimately be asking, why can't regular citizens just vote to fix it? Well, back in 2014, a bombshell political science study looked at 2 decades of policy cases, and their findings were incredibly eye-opening. When looking at the ultra-rich, the data shows a very high correlation between what the economic elite want and actual policy change. But for average citizens, the researchers found that what everyday people want has virtually zero correlation to policy change when it conflicts with the elite. Impartially speaking, the math tells a stark story. Our democracy functions, but your vote primarily matters on issues where you aren't in direct conflict with the elite. So the crucial point is how this dynamic hides right in plain sight. Let's look at how political issues are typically divided. First, we have vertical conflicts. This is wealth versus everyone else. Things like raising taxes on billionaires or closing tax havens. Then we have horizontal conflicts. These are the culture wars and social issues where average citizens are fighting each other left and right. The system intentionally keeps the public relentlessly focused on those horizontal conflicts. By keeping us completely distracted by what divides us, we fail to unite and look up at the vertical wealth inequality that actually impacts all of us.
Section 3, America's historical source code, baked into the system. But why is this structure so rigid? To answer that, we actually have to move backwards in time and analyze America's historical source code. Scholars point out that the U.S. constitutional design purposefully created a system where a minority could legally block majority rule. If we neutrally look at transcripts from the Constitutional Convention, we see sentiments from the Founding Fathers stating, to secure the rights of property, the evils we experience flow from the excess of democracy. The system of checks and balances, things you know well like the Senate and the Supreme Court, was largely designed to protect property from what the founders feared would be the tyranny of the majority. The capacity for oligarchy is essentially baked right into the source code.
Let's move to the Progressive Era and see how this builds historically, because we've actually fought this exact battle before. During the Gilded Age, wealth concentration was just as extreme as it is now, and it sparked a massive public backlash. Following the timeline, an anti-monopoly law is finally passed in 1890. In 1894, Congress passes a federal income tax, but just 1 year later, in 1895, the Supreme Court steps in and overturns the income tax entirely. It took almost 20 years, an entire generation of grueling struggle, to finally pass the constitutional amendment in 1913 just to allow an income tax. It visually proves just how incredibly difficult it is to implement any kind of structural change.
Section 4. Preparing for the rupture and the path forward.
Bringing our explainer back to the present day, what does this actually mean for us? How can society dismantle these modern wealth defense mechanisms? Well, experts agree there are actionable solutions that would severely cripple the industry today. First, fully enforce the Corporate Transparency Act. We already have laws designed to ban anonymous shell companies. Enforcing them would completely destroy the mazes used to hide wealth. Second, properly fund the IRS. Instead of auditing average citizens, give the agency the resources to hire top-tier talent who can actually investigate elite financial crimes. And third, implement a direct wealth tax, taxing the hoarded assets of the ultra-rich directly.
But as we saw with the timeline of the Progressive Era, making these massive structural shifts is incredibly difficult during normal times. Historical precedent shows us that system upgrades of this magnitude usually only happen during a massive societal crisis, which scholars call a rupture. It generally takes a catastrophe, like a world war or a Great Depression, to momentarily shatter the rigid structures of the status quo and open a brief window where deep, transformational change becomes possible.
Which ultimately leaves us here. The architecture of wealth operates quietly, brilliantly, and right under our noses. But by breaking down these concepts today, by looking past the horizontal distractions and seeing the vertical reality, we can start discussing real solutions. Because history promises us that the status quo will eventually break, and the absolutely most important thing we can do right now is ask ourselves, when the next rupture happens, will we be ready?